In September 2020, the Chinese government formally introduced its new Unreliable Entity List, which had been publicly discussed since May 2019. The Unreliable Entity List could be seen as a counterpart to the Entity List published by the US government, which in recent years included a growing number of Chinese enterprises. In today's video, we will talk about 4 things that you should know about China's Unreliable Entity List. The Unreliable Entity List is set to include foreign entities, which could be enterprises, organizations or individuals, that in the course of international economic and trade activities engage in the 2 following activities. Firstly, activities that endanger China's national interests in terms of sovereignty, security and development. And secondly, activities that violate normal market transaction principles and cause serious damage to the legitimate rights and interests of a Chinese entity, either by suspending regular transactions with the Chinese entity or by applying discriminatory measures against the Chinese entity. At this stage, there remain a few open questions. For example, it is unclear whether the refusal to enter into a transaction with a Chinese entity to avoid violations of regulations of other countries could also be considered as a violation of normal market transaction principles. If a foreign entity is suspected to have engaged in the just mentioned activities, the following procedure can be divided into 2 parts: the investigation and the decision. During the investigation period, the authorities will review the factual circumstances of the suspected activities. The foreign entity will also be given the opportunity to file statements and defend itself. It should be noted, however, that if the factual circumstances are considered to be clear, the investigation period may be skipped by the competent office and a decision may be made immediately. Following the investigation period, the competent office will decide on whether or not to include the foreign entity in the Unreliable Entity List. The decision will be announced, and the announcement may include a designation of the foreign entity as a risky transaction party, as well as a grace period for the foreign entity to cease the suspected activities. Firstly, the inclusion on the Unreliable Entity List and the possible labeling as a risky transaction party may cause a considerable reputational damage. Secondly, the competent office may impose one or several sanctions on the foreign entity. For example, the foreign entity may be restricted or prohibited from import or export activities from and into China. In such case, Chinese entities may only engage in transactions with the foreign entity if they have applied for and received approval from the competent office. Moreover, the foreign entity may be restricted or prohibited to invest in China, the working or residence permits of its personnel may be revoked, or a fine may be imposed on the foreign entity. It is unclear at this point, but rather unlikely, if past investments of the foreign entity may retrospectively also become subject to the restrictions or prohibitions. The easiest way to get off the list is by ceasing the disputed activities. If the announcement to include the foreign entity in the Unreliable Entity List stated a grace period, the foreign entity may have time to cease the disputed activities during this grace period, and the sanctions imposed on the foreign entities will be suspended during such period. If the grace period has already expired or no grace period was announced, the foreign entity may also apply with the competent office to be delisted. Lastly, the competent office may also decide ex officio to take the foreign entity off the list at any time. In any case, the decision to delist the foreign entity must also be publicly announced. Thank you for watching today's video. For more information on this topic or other China-related corporate governance issues, you may follow the link on your screen. Please also feel free to contact us if you have any questions or comments.